involved into this Open CDE initiative that has a lot of different components, which he's going to explain. And one of the last developments and major releases coming up is the Documents API. So I will be coughing from the back of the room now. And Pasi would have this. Do you want to take questions and comments during the presentation?
Sure, of course. Yeah, anytime. Yeah. Okay. So some of you have heard these things earlier, and some this is like new stuff. So let's see how I'm trying to balance with that. So this is the end report of this OpenCD document API project that we have been having. It's been running from, I don't know, a couple of years. And same group that developed.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Are you connected in and are you sharing the screen? I don't think the
Oh,
online can see it.
No. I thought, okay, so I have to do that.
Are you plugged in?
I'm plugging to the here.
Yeah.
So we started with the VCF. This group started with VCF first, with the VCF file format, then the VCF API, and then there was a discussion like, okay, now we have a way of dealing with issues, but how can we actually get the IFC files? Because then in VCF, the IFC files were just like there somehow, and then we started developing this document API to access the IFC files. And then there are other APIs that we are thinking about, like this data exchange, how to properties, something that we already discussed. And the foundation API is something that we kind of extracted from the BCF. There are some common things like authentication and authorization. Documents API is the one that we are dealing with. So this is the goal, how to get documents server to a client software, such as from a CAT to CDE, and users having to deal with downloading the files to file system. And we are dealing first version with the interactive flow, so there is like a human running the process. We also have had discussions about like non-interactive. That would be server to server, how to synchronize things in servers, but that's a kind of more complicated thing. And these companies who are, okay, not all of them are in the final, like not all of them have done the implementation, but most. So there are server vendors, Akka, Oracle, Aconex, Teamsync, that's a Finnish company. Grano is also a Finnish company. So far having done the implementation, the Korean billing was Connect Havelos, so it's so functionality is out here is initiate the document selection from client software. Maybe you can having to go and download the file from the browser. And then you can get directly to software. Also, you can upload documents directly from your software to the server. And well, the users, when they are uploading, they need to enter data, and also when you're downloading documents, it's metadata related to those documents. I've been using a kind of similar style of that we have in VCF REST API, but this also is a little bit different in that way that the VCF API is very strict, it like lists a lot of endpoints, whereas the document API has a few API endpoints, and then the rest the client discovers. Also quite a lot of information. One example of a giving what we are doing in a nutshell. So this is called the documentation. So this just explains how Janet wrote the architectural model. I want to hold reference model for the CDE and actually browser gets the CDE UI and then select there what she wants to download, and then we get the reference model to the software, and then continue working happily. And here is another use case. And this is about the upload. So, and John wants to upload what he has been working on. And here we get the UI in the browser using the metadata that is needed, and then uploads the design or model to the CDE. One of the first missions that we did by developing this standard is that there is this user interface, the user interaction, that we delegate that always to the CDE. They have the UI because different CDEs, even different projects in the same CDE have different metadata that they use. Need to fill in. So then it's simpler to let the CDE provide the user interface that they need, and also the user interface can be dynamic one. So that interaction happens there, and when that is done, there is a callback coming back to the client, and then the client can start downloading or uploading. We started last year. We have late last year we had specifications ready, and we have had some trial tests doing starting in February. We have been quite happy with what we have been. Details, so this you never know how to pronounce this Heidu. So just like discovering the links instead of like having a big API where everything. Yeah, I think at the moment we fixed for our part, and then the rest are discovered. And you can find that API specification in on the part, and there is also a Swagger API available. The API spec. There's some streamline diagrams, so for example how the download works. Here the client application, initiate document selection, the CD, okay, call me back on this URL. Done the selection, and user has done the selection, then there is the URL sent back. Client then the client gets a URL back that actually opens the server UI in the browser. Then when the user has done the selection, by which documents to download, then there is a JSON coming back that gives like the document version information that okay, you want to download this document, you go to this URL. This is like the link to this version, so it basically gives the same thing back. You can access the metadata from this link. You can see what all versions are available of this document from this. I remember. No, site is here. And there is also documented ID, so that the same document later on. And then the client downloads the binary data and use the upload flow similar diagram. So here the client gives that okay, I want to upload this file at this ID during this session. URL comes back and it is open in the browser, and user does the action there, gives data, whatever, in the browser UI, and then there's the callback back to the client, and then the client sends okay, the file size is this big. File, and then again you get a response. That actually gives you that you will put the document in multiple multiple parts. Right? This, from beginning of this to time, you upload in this URL, and then that onwards this URL and so on. You can even upload things in parallel. When the document is uploaded, you again get this response body that first. And there is a way to also give a hint to the BCF that BCF API that this is the reference. When you're creating an issue, you can use reference. That file in the TD knows that this is related to that file. Actually, here is so there is this kind of protocol, but there is this OpenCD documents protocol that use the document version URL. Okay, then there are some screenshots from different software. This is from Akka. PCA Hubble, the Singaporean. Excel. Builder.com. Panda. Rocco. And Solibri. So some testimonials from happy users.
Go back to the slide that shows the Solibri.
Yeah.
I think this is really showing kind of the different servers. So that obviously the whole point of the API is not that it's an open CDE, CDE with an open API. This is an open API to existing.
Yeah.
And make it clear that.
Just so I'm understanding. What you're doing is you're opening up a file that's stored on AConnect, but you're opening it up there without having to go to AConnect, then download it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so is it meant to interface files that way, or is it meant like from modeling offering programs, or is it meant to like move files from one storage system to another?
Okay, so this is this version of the standard is for the interactive flow. So this is between you could also use it for like web-based clients, but most of the clients are happy clients. So you can access the documents, and this is you can use it for any documents, not only ASCII files. You can use PDFs, Word, whatever.
It would really mean that you don't have to store something in two, right? That if I have a project that people work on, they store something in Autodesk, and store something in Coco, or something. But they wouldn't have to
Well, basically, it depends how your project is set up, but if it's set up so that you have everything in one CDE, then everybody can access that same CDE. Another thing is that you can also get like updates. So if you have you can ask, like for example, sorry, we can ask do you have any updates for this file, and then the user is notified that if there are some updates on the server, and get the new versions also done.
One stored in both places.
Yeah, like the client software can get all the users. But if you have two servers, like I don't know if you have a server, there is a Proco server, but I assume there is. So if you would want to say have a Aconex and Proco server linked to the API because this is interactive.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Basically, Connor, the way to look at this is standardizing how anyone would interact with any CDE from any other tool, right? And that you only have one way of doing it, implemented one way, so it simplifies. You don't have, one login protocol for Aconex, then a totally different one for BIM Collab, a totally different one for Connect. Like, nope, the interface is this, and simplifies that by quite a bit.
They aim any vendor to create or support this API, and then any software would at least have a minimal interaction with open copywriting.
Yep.
Any sort of versioning?
Versioning of what? The API or
Files log into the API.
files? Versioning of the files. Yes, you can get the versions of the document. There is like a here. Yeah, if you want to know what versions of the document there are available at the server, you will call this in.
Versioning driven by the user interacting with that authoring tool, or is that the server just specifying the version?
Server is specifying the version. Like client software, if you want to upload a new version to the server document, client like initiates that, and then okay, I want to upload this document, and if it has been previously updated, you will give like the document ID. So then that same document will be updated to the server. Server decides like how the versioning happens. API is not concerned.
If I said the API wouldn't be concerned, but client server.
Yeah, and all the like the CDs like have their own versioning. So. Yeah, we cannot dictate.
But Pasi, like you showed a slide of the implementers. There's something like 70 different CDs on these calls. I mean, not everybody's done the implementation, but there are so many of these tools. Can't be prescriptive on any of those things.
Yeah.
So, is there anything here? Is there some prescribed set of attributes or data?
No,
is it somehow industry specific or
no, it's the server specifies the metadata that they want to provide to the client. Also,
so
server
different
specifies.
servers will provide different metadata.
Right?
And different servers will provide different metadata.
Yeah.
So our set of data will have nothing to do with.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, so the client should know what data to expect from core files and what data to expect from other files.
I mean, if they're coming from the same CDE. If you have, say, Aconex is hosting both Revit and Procore files, then of course you would get same metadata.
What can be PDF files, by the way?
Yeah, it could be
Some
PDF.
published by Procore, other published by...
Yeah, but I can come to a live demo, so I think that will. So we got good feedback from the people who were testing this. The way we work is that we had some point weekly calls, and then we had most of them we have had the second week we have had calls, and then we have had hackathons for different topics. We have had doing the standard, testing it out, documentation and those kinds of things. So we have and of course now is and then there are some other extensions that server communication and I remember what we did. This documents API basically it already came in V3. We separated this. Documents API. So if you implement API, you don't need to implement Documents API and vice versa. You can only both if you want. Okay. So now live demo. Leon. So slightly different UI than was in the screenshots. And hope it works. So now servers, these servers that are listed here, listed in our backend. So here, for example, Vimsync. Now I click on select from CDE, and I get this Vimsync UI. One very simple model, one wall. And what it is. Oh. And we can ask Olympic to give me a prompt when there is a new version of this model. Then I take my authoring tool. I go here and show that there is this. The name of the wall is 1006323. So Notepad++ doesn't have an implementation of this document. But if it had, it could be could upload it. Or any other CD that supports. I will now go to buildingSMART. Now I uploaded that one, and I have these updates available button here. So the version of file. Now you can see that the name of the wall changed. There is this metadata. Is what buildingSMART now provides me. So whatever they chose to give me. Okay, let's do also the sync. So if I save the model. And I say sync that to CD. Again, I get this buildingSMART page. Like this. And happens. Old file that I can. That's like basically thing. Also just to prove that this doesn't work only with buildingSMART. I can try. Okay. But coming from Echo. Yeah.
That obviously impose certain how these documents are organized, folders or installations, who has access to what, how
that is like when I've been working with, I have access Aconex and TeamSync on this browser like recently, so I have my credentials there stored. But if I hadn't, it would first ask my username and password, and then based on those, I would have access to the files that I have access to. So the CDE is in control, which in files I have access to. And also, the API is not concerned what the project or file or folder structure is on the CDE. Because user interaction happens in the browser, and the CDE can provide any kind of user interface for that only when the selection is done in the user button, and then there's a callback coming from the server to the client, the information how to continue.
So CD on the kind of defines interaction with document. Save or retrieve set of documents.
Yeah.
That's all. It doesn't give an API to create a project, for example.
No.
Say that I have 5 subcontractors. Documents.
No.
It's called Documents API,
Okay.
just about that. So.
Yeah.
When you're filling up a list of servers to connect to, that list coming from, or is that fixed?
There is the list of servers comes from Colibris backend, because there's no central place because there always when you establish a connection with the CDE, in VCF API, server needs to give the client client ID and client secret. So those are not public information. So we have those in our backend. So our client desktop calls our backend to get the list of servers. And there is this discovery API in the foundation API that which API the server supports. If it supports BCF, BCF. If it supports document API. So we will call that to find out if the server supports document API, and then we list those services.
So if I was a server vendor, if I was a new server vendor, then I would need to approach all the individual offering tools to get.
Yeah, basically, yeah. At the moment, it is like that. I think there is also a way to do client registration, online, but so far, always when there is a new server, they contact us. They say that they have implemented it. Then we put it in our beta environment, we test it a little bit, and then when we find it working, then we put publicly our production version. And when it's published there, then it is right away available to all our clients, all Solibri users, because that information is not baked in the software.
It still cannot understand. Looking at this UI example, it starts with presenting to the user some set of documents, presumably that he has access.
Yeah.
What is it through API?
I mean, the client, let's start, go here. This is Oracle using. I can go here, choose different projects, for example. I can get
What are this? What connector to?
this one.
Yeah.
It is supposed to choose a different project, but this seems to give me a.
This is Oracle, this is AConnex's UI.
Yeah.
It's not a part of the OpenCDE API. So all the OpenCDE API does is says, hey, I want to connect to this CDE service, and then takes you to the browser interface and says, okay, then I'm going to use the whatever CDE interface for that. The API itself is just routing.
But I mean,
But it's not providing.
on the server, there are, I don't know, 10 million documents from
Yeah.
100 different companies,
Yep.
1,000 different projects.
But it'll all depend on your credentials when you sign into the CDE. So
Okay,
if you sign in and you're only granted one project, then you only see the files from that one project. You won't see everything in the CDE. Of the CDE.
What?
Of the CDE, yeah.
Every one of them does the same thing. You have projects, you have permissions, you have users, you have documents. This is basically just eliminating
So CDE
download and
knows
upload.
about project
Yeah.
permissions.
Yeah.
The API does, like Pasi said, the API doesn't care about any of those things. All it says is, request, I want this document, give me a UI so I can pick which one. Or if I want to upload, give me a UI so I can tell you where to put it.
But why is navigation UI? It's about how.
Yeah, but people that would be browsing to the site are using the CDE, so they know it, right? So implicitly, people have to use these tools already, so they have to know how that works.
And maybe we should have already, but checking for like a new file or an updated file.
Yeah.
How
What does it happen for?
or yeah, how do you,
Okay, there is,
notify you? Or,
no, there is actually one endpoint for document versions, and back. Okay, here it is. So this is one of the fixed endpoints. So you call this endpoint, you request body as a document query. And so here you give IDs, like I want to query the versions of these, and then you get the latest version of each, and then you can check if that is newer than what you already have. This, then you can.
Incidentally, something like Windows. You'd also build a regularly smart
Yeah. It's like the way, like it's only to check that quite frequently that endpoint. Whatever documents you have downloaded from the CDE and whichever those you want to get the updates to. You send the IDs of those and get newer versions.
So Pasi, you were saying that with version 1 or 1.1, first step was really this interactive mode. So is the plan then for version 2 to be the non-interactive mode, so the server-to-server interactions?
That's meant to be see like
Okay.
Can get like enough users, like companies who want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So far, there hasn't been too many.
Yeah.
There is this one guy from Ireland.
Graham?
John,
No,
Egan, no?
John
Yeah.
Egan, yeah.
Yeah. But okay, that's good to know. Like,
I mean, I think from the end user's point of view, especially on large complex projects that have multiple PDs on a single project, you know, it'd be very easy for the end users in that project to make the case and say, well, you know, the contractor, the engineer, and the architect, or engineers, depending on how many different engineering disciplines you got, you know, we want to sync these files across all of these different CDs, rather than saying, oh, well, you'll only find the architecture ones over here, or you only find the engineering ones here, or you only find the contractor ones there, and then have to go in and out to get those. Whereas you would say, hey, if I could have a project file folder, and then it could just sync and update between all the CDs in the background, yeah, that would be ideal.
Yeah, that's a regular problem for us. We make a, server for contractors. It's just for contractors, but we regularly interface with all the models for architects and engineers. They're not stored in our system, but they want them. Because that's where they work.
Yeah.
So the idea that would be syncing over to our system, so that contractors can interface with it and do.
yeah. Well, it's good to have more than one company. Who would like to try that? So then it might happen.
One quick query is, at the moment it appears, if I want to get any documents in a package, so I'm getting 3 or 4 documents from the package, and day one I go and get documents. 2 days later I'm working on multiple projects. I have the project folder come down with documents so I can send my next query up to start in that folder.
Yeah, it is. You can kind of follow there is some information that you can and when you're doing the next query, that it will take you to the right
Folder.
project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quick, sorry. Is there any locking mechanism that prevents the same file being like exported twice to the same or to different solutions?
Same file imported twice.
Or imported, yeah, but more in, like for instance, if you are in BIMsync and you have a file that you then want to open in Solidly, if you open it from Solidly using your OpenCDE, can you prevent that while it's being open in Solibri, it's not being open offer, or?
Well, the thing is that that is up to the CDE to implement.
Okay.
Typically, these files are, how should I say, like the CDEs have like control of who has the right to do what where. So,
But what I mean is in the OpenCD, like the API, leaving a trace that the file has been exported through the API, so that then the CDE knows that it's being edited elsewhere and doesn't need.
well, that's up to the CDE to deal with what to happen.
Can it communicate that there's a lock on a file? Or is there any kind of added metadata channel to communicate, extensions or something?
File or something.
The spec right now is just download and upload. Could overload and start throwing locks into the metadata, but that won't get kind
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a metadata channel on it?
Like you get metadata. For example, this one I got from Aconex. It has this kind of data. This one I got from Building. It has different data.
Okay.
Yeah.
property value pairs.
Yeah.
And theoretically, just say, I'm going to pre-check all my properties with Solibri or whatever their identifiers in the city. Without that, it's just one giant namespace. I wouldn't want to see a locking mechanism in my vendor. Yeah, spec for it, and some sort of vendor did. But right now, when I asked about versioning, you said the version is up to the server. And
Great. How much time do you need and how much time do you want?
What do we want to get done? Do we want to skip to the end or start with the beginning?
Let's bring you up front and see where it goes.
Okay. All right.
Any other major questions for Pasi?
You know where to find me anyway. So.
Oh, there was one major question.
Yes.
That's sure, it's a major question, but I do want to know, do you have a comparison if you have two versions, the same file? So 3 months later, you upload new version of file. I forgot what got changed.
Well, that is, in Solibri we have a way to compare different versions of the same file for different types of files. But that's in Solibri, it's not part of the API.
Probably I do want to see from the screen, visualize where are the changes,
Yeah.
especially geometry
But
level.
that would be then,
By Solibri.
yeah, you can do it in Solibri, or if the CDEs do it, implement that kind of feature, then it's up to them, but it's not about this API kind of thing.
Here, kind of the full 2 days, right?
Yeah, I'm flying back tomorrow evening.
Any other questions? Just thank you. Are we doing applauses and stuff? You want to use the screens, right?
I'm actually just going to use the easel.
That one?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's in the center, it's easier. Do we need to get a mic or something set up for remote people?
Mics are in there.
Okay.
Somebody needs to be wondering if we can put a camera on you.
So, everyone knows Greg, right? Most of you? Are you going to introduce yourself?
Yeah, again, it's, I'm a building architect, not a software architect. That one. But yeah, I work for HOK. I'm probably here because HOK was involved way back in the day to start buildingSMART, IAI, and the sort of things that sort of continued through. But that's how I showed up today. This is an IFC 5 update, but in trying to sort of talk through it, and we'll see how much I actually need the whiteboard. I wanted to give you sort of, I think, the right steps got us where I think we're sort of starting to converge on something. So I got involved, if you will, with buildingSMART back in like maybe 2012. At that point, what had started to happen, and I'll write down these key things. I think that's the only thing. word for is sort of the linked data web WC3 group was very involved with buildingSMART, and this ultimately resulted in a sort of an RDF standard. So data and RDF. So basically, okay, why would that group be involved? Well, basically, if you're thinking about linked data and RDF, you're thinking about, okay, IFC and buildingSMART in a huge wild world, and you want to be able to link it all together. Logical thing you want to work on. So this was happening, you know, somebody could probably help me.
2016, 2017.
Yeah, there you go. So I have a bad memory, so I was maybe 17 when I really got back and took over from Leif Grunholm from...
Rotterdam was 2016.
Yeah, there you go. So I got involved and took over the technical room from Leif. He was sort of the temporary guy. But this work was going on. So basically, it's just, again, you have to think about why people do things. So there's an understanding that building data lives in a huge world of things that want to be... Good idea to think about this, but at the same time, it was probably early, if you will, in how to think about this world. And again, I'm a building architect. I see this, that looks amazing, but I'm curious. When you start to look real hard, like the data people love this world, but software architects, they don't bother. Often you find not much intersection. So like database people that build applications aren't using RDF, they are using the triple stores and this sort of stuff. So we have this standard that solves a real lot of problems. Question so far? I'm starting here because it wraps around. So, you know, at the same time, we started to have conversations within buildingSMART, functionally how to make it sort of better, like online and offline or web use, you know, how to segment data, you know, infrastructures coming into the world. So how do you make everything not have to be one file or, you know, sort of things. How do we have assemblies? How do we address security? You know, how do we make distributed sort of things? How do you support owner-specific property information? You name it. So while this is happening, there's already a conversation starting about, you know, sort of what's the work that needs to come into the IFC? Then you have technical things that people are clearly asking for within this world, which is stuff like, I said I would write this down. So we have functional stuff, that's requirements, and then I'll just call them technical functional stuff. Just basically things like version control, packaging, being able to assemble objects, you know, sort of starting to, and this is something, again, I'm sort of coming late to, like the strict object-oriented nature of the way we're treating objects today is not really solving people's problems in a lot of cases. Perfect example is like the door in IFC and a lot of CAD programs would be the frame and the thing in the door, but to a security-minded person, that exit sign is part of that door. Right? We have no great way to think about those things as being a collection of things, whereas in actuality, somebody thinks it's a part of the door. If you had a camera or a control system, the electrical engineer thinks that's part of the door, but we have no way of assembling this collection of things. We have a multi-representation problem. Question?
Yep. Isn't it exactly the BSD case, allowing you to connect all this information and say, this is related to my IFC door?
Well, you could relate a property set to the door, but if you wanted to say, Billy, I'm Greg, that's an easel. What if you thought Greg and the easel are the same thing? We don't know how to do that, right? Like, you can't do this with BSD. You can add a property to me with BSD or a property to the easel.
I think we can do in BSD creating an entity which is file blah blah blah, or presentation blah blah, which contains the board and Greg the wall. Just thinking
that's beyond my understanding of what you can do in BSD, but that's possible. We're halfway there, apparently. But
let's continue tomorrow.
Right. No, but this was a good conversation. But the point is, this is a needed requirement because that strobe and that column are important to a fire engineer. things don't matter if you're a structural engineer, the strobe is irrelevant. So this mixing and putting things together is an important thing. Then there's the multi-representation problem, both from a, like, traditional LOD concept. I just want a point for my GIS system, and I want, like, fabrication geometry for some other use case. Patient issues, and then at the same time, we have multiple owner problems. I like light fixtures. A good example here. There's other things. You know, the light fixture in this room, probably get the scale of this project, was an interior designer placed the lights. A lighting engineer or a sort of a lighting designer probably did the bulb design and picking the fixtures themselves. An electrical engineer owned the connectivity. Those three things are actually owned independently, but we don't have a way to assemble that representation into one thing, which is problematic because then we just get three copies of light fixtures that have to be the interpreter as a person, which traits I will take from which data representation. So good. Okay, so then we came up with the IFC to-do list. So if you're technical and you've been around in buildingSMART, please raise your hand if I'm missing stuff. But it's basically like, okay, what is the stuff we got wrong over the years? What's the messy stuff that we need to clean up? So we got like modularity, but not just modularity in the standard, but actually in the serialization. What do we call it? Concept templates are messy because it makes data you write to disk sort of very non-modular. You know, simplification, and Leon mentioned, we had this meeting in Zurich. Like if you make an update in the IFC, you have these cascading updates. Addy, if you want to interact with it. We have a bunch of things that aren't rooted in the same place. This doesn't inherit from root. There's too many choices on how to do things, like the layers, like you brought up, if you talk about it, you know, I have a wall, it has a series of layers. There are at least three ways to do that in IFC. At least three. A lot of things like in the implementer agreements that probably need to sort of be specified. And then they're like more logically about more classification, less objectification. So putting less detail in the IFC schema and allow classifications to do a lot more of the heavy lifting. Modernize the schema much more. The other things we're missing? The people have their own list, so Pasi, do you have anything on your list?
No, I think
At the end as well. But if anybody has one, add it in there. Okay, so we have, you know, the link data discussion, we have these two things, we have, you know, sort of simplify. I can't spell, so. Okay, so then what else we got? So then, in the last couple of years, work has started on just the basics, which is how do you put stuff like, how do you put IFC in the web, which has naturally led to IFC JSON project, which Dennis and others have worked on. It's basically, okay, regardless of all these things, not irregardless, I think, we should have a representation that works well on the web. I think what you quickly come to is the sort of classic IFC, IFC4, it's clumsy, so you end up with still this big binary sort of file, or you know, it's JSON, so it's not binary, but a big file, just sending it around is not a solution. And then there's a little discussion about bringing back some of these contacts because JSON LD concept that floats around in the world, that's floating around in the world, not being used a ton, but it is out there and it sort of embodies some of these things that are nice about it. It's transformable and that sort of thing. Questions? Everybody looking at me, so am I confused?
everybody's confused. Perfect.
Okay.
Only my
So when I see this, I think, okay, that looks great. The linked data concept, okay, I'd like to think about IFC call it a graph because it is. So, and all of our data is really connected. Often people talk about IC being hierarchical. It only is because people like to put it in like building, site, story. You could put it in space, banana, wall, if you felt like it. If that was a useful way to look at the data, it's totally valid to think of that way as well. So it looks hierarchical in the tooling because that's how people use it. That's the best way to think about it. Represented in a whole different set of ways. But back to this problem, at least from my perspective, this is an academic world, this linked data world, I think. Fight me on this, but you don't see, like, from a layman's perspective, you look around and nobody that builds software for tooling's perspective or professionally is using this to build applications.
Wikidata is based on RDS.
Yeah.
And Freebase, I mean, I used to work at Google on the search engine. It's absolutely essential.
Right. But I think you'd say that, I'll be more, nobody's making interactive applications. That edit data quickly and all these other
I don't know. I mean, I think Wikipedia is.
So this is like, there's always an.
I don't want to fight, but we were just kind of chit-chatting about this. I think the large majority of developers don't use it as a system,
right,
because it's considered a little, abstract and math geeky or something like that.
Right.
But there is a tremendous dependency on it.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you ever want to figure out where linked data is used, try to open a restaurant and want to get it advertised. I mean, basically the suggester system in Google's LD specific. There's other versions, but like how you describe your restaurant is.
I'm trying to find like an entity count, but
yeah.
MetaWeb was the company back in the day, like 15 years ago, that was working on it. Google bought them. It became Freebase, and that grew. I mean, hundreds of millions of entities. And then that was the data input for most Google search results for entity types. So if you said like how tall is Barack Obama, that was coming from that data.
Yeah.
And then Google shut down Freebase, but turned it into Wikidata in coordination with the.
I mean, let's just go through the other place you definitely see this is in knowledge graph. Some of them use graphs, but some of them use our. The point of bringing this up is like, it looks like a good idea, but we're missing the software architecture side of this discussion. So, we're having these sort of what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, what features do we have to add, and this is where, again, I'm a consumer, not a creator of any of these things. So this is where the last couple months I was into entity component system. Entity component system, please feel free to give a better definition, but it's basically, instead of a strict sort of object-based world that if you get the wall, you get all this stuff, it comes from the gaming space where instead of doing that, you have an entity, and the entity doesn't really contain anything, but if you need collision or you need a set of properties, you end up adding a component that has collision, adding geometry. So it's an interesting idea. It looks like this because it's sort of easily to represent in a graph, not in RDF, but it conceptually looks like the same. Then when you start to look around, everybody in this room has already started to do it in their sort of thinking about the next generation of, we call it, application-independent data representations. So, FDX talks specifically about entity component systems on the website. Microsoft Digital Twin Service, DTL, is actually JSON LD and TCS, I have to remember my acronyms. Trimble's parameter service, Trimble's not in the room, but that was talked about when I've raised. Leon was talking about associating parameters with things. iModel, same model, and in a very, a slightly different way, but USD acts this way, so you see description, which is more. So what you have is a good idea, a list of stuff that need to be fixed, added, or supported, and then the industry, all of a sudden, we have this sort of, I think, a pretty clear alignment in software architecture, if the best way to call this. Storage becomes less important, because I think storage can be interchangeable. You can store these concepts however you feel like. But I think there's a clear intersection of everybody agrees that this monetized view of the world is the way to solve the problem, because you don't have to have strict ownership of a light fixture. You can have a set of properties coming from the lighting engineer and a set of properties coming from the contractor, and you can have two copies and have separate properties attached. So it points to this idea that, you know, this area component system-like style of architecture solves a real problem, and everybody's already doing it. On top of that, IC 4.3 has started to think this way with some simple stuff. But like, address is a perfect example. Sets for address, you can now associate with any entity. Why would it matter what has an address? Very logical approach. This is in 4.0. Location is the other one that was pointed out to me. Starts to act this way. Thomas shared the link, I'm remembering off the top of my head. But so the point of going through all this is we have this, have a multi-representation set of information we have to put together. We had a good start with thinking about sort of RDF, but nobody uses application space. We have our list of stuff to solve. And then finally, we have a system architecture that I think maps really well, and actually everybody agrees. Anybody disagree with any of this? Yeah. So, our next
In
step,
a buildingSMART meeting. No.
yeah, exactly. Nobody disagrees in the buildingSMART meeting is pretty impossible.
I think this is,
That's what we're here.
we try to think like workflows, how this is working.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is a theory at this point.
Yeah.
So just from a next steps, I'm in this meeting talking about this. I'm going to do a day-long session or half-day session in Montreal, which is our next big meeting, to have the people that are making these systems. We've asked Autodesk, Trimble, Bentley, if you care to speak, you're making one of these, please raise your hand. I'm happy to have you. Talk through why this system works. The point here and the opportunity as we see it is, well, we have the list of what to do. We have an architecture now that maps, we think, pretty well. We have good examples of how we would look to modernize ISC to work in the web. And if we think for this kind of data, and if you're building an API, right transport, to think about our first implementation being JSON LD or JSON, don't care, but that's sort of almost a recipe how to solve a problem, which is rare that we have such sort of clear view of how to do something. So the next steps is we're going to do the session in Montreal, but my estimation, unless there's like huge things that we run into, the big opportunities here are both to define a modernized ISC representation and at the same time that works to the web and the API that goes along with it. You can have a conversation between systems. We know how to send the data in a way that's non-destructive. Use relationships, how do you define relationships, all these things that are messy with graphs, representations that we have to figure out how to handle. There are transaction boundaries, all these things we'd have to solve, but I think that's basically what feels like the world we're in right now.
We just have
First, Nigel.
So very quickly, brilliant. This is fully supported on that. It makes total sense for metadata. Awful lot of sense for geometry for buildings, but when you start looking at civil engineering geometry and say a 10-kilometer area of the Alps as a surface, JSON is going to be problematic.
Oh yeah, so yeah.
The geometry could hit.
Yeah, so what the transport is for these things, I'm not saying it has to be JSON. I think the default is would we start with the step encoding that we have and then serialize it in some compressed format? I don't care. These are exactly the things to address.
Again, with point clouds and surfaces, there are industry, open
Yep.
file formats that have high compression. So
Well,
all you need to do is link to it.
So I didn't get to this, like, everything's a component. My list is GLTF, OBJ, point cloud, scripts, parameterized geometry, control geometry, materials, yeah. So, like, in this model, it is very easy to take these sort of already existing standards and say, oh, that's a component representation, here's the method.
JSON is acting as a metadata language, pointing to resources for blobs or whatever.
So Jason, there's a,
Call me Jason. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, yeah, I think, well, it's just important, I think, to decouple geometry from everything else, right? Because, I mean, it's a full island of problems in and of itself. But to Greg's point, well, I think one thing, I don't know if you talked about this, but sort of the modularization of the schema and the instances is a big piece of this, right? Somehow, can you build an ontology that is modularizable and also extensible, right? And potentially extensible by being able to incorporate or traverse to other quasi-compatible standards. I was literally on a call when I just found out that, I don't know if you guys know who ASHRAE and NIST are, but they're developing an ontology for buildings and building energy systems that's based on RDF. I mean, everybody's doing this, right? So, and I think, one thing we have to do is just embrace the fact that if we cannot be in the business of just like competing our ontology versus our schema versus others, because there's, it's a zero-sum game, right?
NIST being NIST.
Yeah. So to the question about geometry, why would we not? We already support, a mesh-based and I don't know what you want to call it, pseudo-parametric or solid geometry, feature-based representation in SPF. The mechanism in IFC is there to be able to support any number of them right now, including whatever your favorite point cloud, binary is. So I think then there's a layer on that, which is then, okay, how do you validate that and develop, how do you insist on certain representations in certain contexts, right? I mean, I think I'm babbling, but I think the thing that we can all agree on is there's huge value in, I'd say, the knowledge definition in IFC, right? I mean, there's no point in recreating that. But the data architecture needs to be fundamentally modernized, and I think that is a small amount of work compared to the 30 years that we've put into this, but it's still a huge amount of work. And the getting consensus or determining how we need, I think the requirement to develop universal consensus is less in the modern day, right? But we still need to get some consensus about where we start and what are effective use cases, and can we begin somewhere and get traction, like maybe not take on the whole IFC schema, but subsets. Where do we start and where do we start building success? And then I think the modularization becomes part of that, right? Because we can pick off pieces that we can be effective at now, and maybe I personally think just put the geometry thing on the side and say, that also makes it easy, because that's probably, to me, that's like 95% of the hard stuff in addition to relations or a couple of other things about IFC.
But, yeah. So at the end of the day, I think we should not miss the fact that having a different name from this ECS architecture, but like there's tremendous industry-wide alignment that a solution to this problem looks like that. So we should take advantage of the work being done in these big companies to say, well, the open representation should steal the best ideas from the internal representation from the API and the representation that's the open one. It doesn't have to figure out this stuff out itself.
If you believe, and I think we do, that again, most major vendors are working on something similar internally, then we really need to answer your questions and your enemy's questions, which is, okay, if you're developing this internally, what is the use case and the value of having an open standard? Definitely, I believe that value is there, but you guys go and believe that.
Totally agree. The idea that data should be open schema, but I also think the geometry schema is much more advanced than the other formats, open standards supporting the geometry. They are very complicated. Using JSON could be not that easy. Still, I think they're separate technologies to be used, and JSON has an advantage. Some open standards similar to JSON can be adopted, and the other parts for the geometry, and IC has much better than the coverage for the industry widely used, and could be covered by different ways. Yeah.
I think the entity component architecture, I think it supports arbitrary representation so long as the receiver know what to do with it. That's one thing that's important. But the other things that are part of the weirdness of me being here is like I'm the only representative from an architecture firm here. There's the simplified schemas that they all build really benefit from being, I can have my, sort of my parametric definition of a curtain wall. It's just points and a set of curves as being a component as well. Have to leave the structure and the benefits that IFC gives you in the internet. I think that's an important selling point.
One thing, I don't know if how to exchange IFC so that somebody can continue working on it, or even if I would say Revit, you would save a IFC there, and if you would like to continue editing it, you would still need to have a native file. But if there was a way to attach the parameters that you are using to the IFC so that you are the only ones who can interpret it, but anyway, you wouldn't need to be able to save it in the IFC and then continue editing it without basically the native file.
I think, I'm showing basically, have a concept in IC5 that not all components would necessarily have to be open. Right, so obviously we want to have as much open as possible.
Yeah.
But there could be some capability to say, well, this part, right, is reserved for particular.
If someone else can interpret it, why not?
Sure.
But it's not meant to be interpreted by the.
You can say that concept a little further. If you say this is a parametric object that is, and I'll pick Revit as an example, don't preempting anything good Adept is doing here, don't take it, but if we know this is a Revit family, here we've got the metadata to define the parameters that would define that, because that's in there. There's nothing in the cloud environment, you change a parameter, pass it off to a server, it sends you back the new geometry.
Yeah,
So it works really well as this container.
And it makes like the assumption, it makes it really easy to make user a service endpoint and author these components. You don't have to, that's what you own, you can control, the server we're talking about here that hosts this. You don't have to like give a whole wall and everything about it to a what you need, give me all kinds of architectural.
One is a couple of comments in the chat. With a question, idea of your discussion with the group. Also, it's about linked data that to be included, that you're going to on it, or is it point which
this is where the normal linked data world looks different from, well, I want to make a graph storage representation that I can store in an arbitrary in a database. And I don't know how to reconcile that right now. I do that actually have the same properties. It's just often a technology discussion, right? needs RDF, turtle and stores, but a graph can be represented as anything. Do we have to say it's data, or we say it's a graph representation? This is how you make a representation.
A comment, again, the going on in the context of the USC. And they are quite interested in merging or connecting vocabularies. For instance, specializing on interlocking signaling. I see.
Yep.
And one of the ideas they are following up is to have some data, some ontology analysis done and
the reason Jason LD shows up in our discussions often is it like it lives well in both worlds. Practical reason that shows up. Like, I don't think we have to make an artificial choice. I think we should be.
For me, Jason is thing because nowadays you can say everybody out there is a Jason to consume. Whatever IT education he has, everything is converging into Jason. I'm observing. API thing, I saw today that also now state of the art almost everywhere. The ethics systems.
So, but I think the connectivity graph link part is the people and how that gets translated into a software implementation. I think this community sort of thought we should like everything is RDF. I think that's storage technology versus transport technology is what we should focus on. All the storage technologies at once. View of the world.
Perhaps one last quick topic. Connecting to what you were saying about modularization and the example you were using about the store and the PX design and what you consider the scope of things that are related to something. I guess that's looking at it from a systems engineering kind of standpoint, where you need to define what a system is, what elements it encompasses. And I guess the part that I think we need to tackle is finding those interfaces. And again, it's not, what you were saying is not so much from the geometrical standpoint, it's more of dealing with systems as blocks and finding these sort of groups of objects and how they interact with the other objects they need to connect to, so that not so much, it's what we were discussing yesterday, not so much working discipline-oriented, but more of a systems engineering kind of approach.
And so the generic way I think I've thought about this particular problem is, let's say you're a rail operator and you have buildings, you have, sort of terms, but like things along the track and signaling and stuff like that. There's no logical reason that if you ever want to work on that data, you want all of it all at once and store all the logic in all of it at the same time. So the idea is you sort of think, well, I have all these entities and components. And there's something like an assembly or a scene concept that you bring things together and you can structure and assign systems on top of those things. How relationships persist at the component level. But there's definitely a assembly concept that comes into play that starts to address some of these things. It looks like, but it looks have an assembly, I could have one. They share the same components. They mean different things. There's an overlay in that data that you put on there, a separate of your business contractor or something put on there.
That's already sort of in the IFC ontology already. Doesn't imply structure, right? I mean, the question is, does that have to be is there only there only be one, so I think the answer is no, right? But we can start with the one, that's already in it. Pretty similar to the part assembly structure you guys. Sites, buildings, projects.
Yeah, I guess that, but at least the way we look at systems engineering is you do have the, what we call the typical product structure, which is the traditional product structure where you organize your different elements, and then you have a logical view. That is typically where you would store the PNIDs of your systems. And there's a connection between these two worlds, the logical and the physical, where in the logical you define, yeah, with symbols, you don't need any actual representation of geometry or 3D or anything, where you define what a component is and how it connects with the other components that it needs to connect. And then you do have, and there the kind of metadata that you manage is different because you need the I don't know, if you're defining electrical systems, you need the voltage, you need the technical properties, and then you connect that with the product structure, with your physical representation of the object, where you do care about the geometry and so on. But that early definition of the logical components and different blocks and how you do those, I guess that for us at least it makes sense to have like these two separate ways because
that ideally should just be an additional module in the schema, right? I mean, you ought to be able to layer that on and pull it down as a separate content or whatever. I mean, and you ought to be able to select which, you want that. If you do, adopt it. It's somewhere on the web. You don't need it. Right?
I think at least some level you need to start with like a basic scene graph. Like I have the components, I need to make a scene graph that looks like the one I want from these basic, but then you have 50 of them on a rail network operator, not one. Even if they share the same data, like the same components would show up in those scene graphs, but then there's like there you put it as a third view. But I think modularity of the assembling of the information. What does the world look like to me of these components? And then above that, there's the. But also, even you can imagine spatial logic might even differ from the component authoring component logic, right? Extra spatial logic in the graph.
That's not necessarily work. They can have lots.
You do all the time.
Yeah. Not like systems organize options. Relationship to it.
I don't even know.
And I've done this, is don't convolve organization with the data organization, right? Essentially, it's starting to look like this is going to be a flat list of objects with relations across them, and those relations will be defined in particular modules. So you can have multiple system organizations. Just in the same way you can have multiple metadata components on top.
With people in their project that have been discussing since the very beginning, like 5 years. They always struggle with the hierarchical view, and they always say, railway is a system of systems. So we always look at things in a different way, very much like the PLM approach. So they also push forward some tests to do that, to stress the use of group, IFC group, kind of helping them grouping things in their own way. Everyone can have their own way of grouping, kind of in the right direction. Probably not the full solution. They were good for this.
But in some ways, the schema already accommodates that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, as it exists now, there are lots of ways to organize that information, that project or whatever, depending on what relationship structure that you use.
Yeah.
And the key thing is trying to figure out a way where it's not monolithic file transfer and simply thinking, and then people can be very choosy about what they want when and in what form.
Right, but it is based on a artificial hierarchical representation that was made on how it had to
Yeah.
30 years ago,
Yeah.
right? We don't have a level-based system.
But, yeah.
We just create one for IT.
The other concept here that is more and more important, and I'll just stick on it, security. I have this particular building, I have a very detailed model on it, and I want to start sharing data with contractors. I want them to fill in data back. So if everything has its own container with a GUID and object inside the GUID, I very clearly restrict what properties people can see, who can do what. They can add their own properties, containerizing the objects to the person. Security requirements which are heavily coming into Europe at the moment. Then I'm going to look slightly a bit further afield and look at, say, National Highways Ordinance. Highways England is now called, sorry. They are saying, we want all this metadata. Here's your new 50 kilometres of road. By the way, we know there's going to be 1,000 street lights. We know there are going to be 12 roundabouts. We know there are going to be 50 intersections. We haven't even designed them yet, but here's the object ID for it. This is the container it's going to sit in.
Yeah, well, and it basically allows, and architect, this is like having these sort of, like as an architect having this sort of stuff is like, oh God, it would save me so much time. Asset owner, tell me the asset IDs of all the things you want. I can number them. Here are the assets once I've made them. You're gonna know, like, you're gonna have this many lights, but here they are. The rooms are gonna end. They're not done. You get to manage your IDs while we work, not fill it in construction. But there's like a nice selfish thing too, because it solves exactly the problem you're pointing to. You can distribute ownership and not like design team owns it in the building world, design team owns it now, and then at some point the contractor owns the whole thing, and try to mediate between those boundaries gets awful.
Where is that happening today? I mean,
So Highways England now are driving this concept of this data open highways.
Yep.
They are probably leading the world.
I didn't actually mean the geography. I meant, like, you know, you're saying they're publishing IDs.
They have, basically, when you start a project, the deliverable is a big
Is it in a database, a spreadsheet?
in a database spreadsheet, it depends on which vendors are producing the data. That list is populated very, very well. Concept model project. And then at any given time, they can analyze that list and say, well, only 10% of them.
Schedule, time, no?
Well, you can wrap up now if it suits. If there's no further questions, we're a little bit over, but that's fine.
One quick question. Not going to be a monolithic, it's very monolithic ASCII file. It's going to be really good APIs to extract these components.
Well, I think that's, I mean, two things we have to still keep in mind is like somebody want to represent this offline, but you can export and so forth. This should be a modern approach to APIs. But we have to work on like, how do you make the take items to where it is today that if I change a wall or a door location on a wall, I don't send you a 55 updates because all these things also. Or we decide being out of date is possible. Is to send you your out of date pieces.
I just point out, like, I think that one of the hard problems is that these collections of objects currently need the scene graph in order to be positioned, right? So the scene graph and its transformations are hard. I mean, if anybody's got good ideas about that one, you know, how do you monitor, how do you or make a scene graph optional, but still have the object in the right location?
But Greg, or I mean if I'm wrong, one of your arguments today was
one thing is the transportation, like how do I move things? But the other thing is that how do I package stuff? Because it seems that now the problem with the current IFC, to have these, let's say, grapes approach, where you can cherry pick your grape, is that if you pull one grape, the entire vineyard all up, right, at the moment? Yep. So probably the first step would be to make sure that you can really package stuff in a way that they can be later transported.
There's packaging, and then there's like how many connections have we made in IFC that we don't make like layers to get to I can't.
In root and IFC wall.
Yeah.
Sure.
One of the fun things is when you export an IFC JSON, you see just 90, you probably know because you're forced to encode this stuff. I mean, 95% of an IFC file is empty data, default data, or placeholder data that is just thrown in because the standard requires you. When you say that JSON is, is a huge file format, yes, but 95% of except for the geometry, 95% was translated.
So the one last thing is that speaking last stuff is he has expressed interest in putting IFC and USD. What that means yet, we do not know. As soon as we do know, I will communicate that back because I've had that. And the other is we're going to start to try to engage the web viewer community, so IFC.js, and start about they're doing a thing where you put IFC in the web, you get geometry in JSON. Well, let's make this JSON compliant with IFC so you can actually just go back and forth versus being separate.
Sounds like goes towards not having a printout.
NVIDIA has the Omniverse.
Oh yeah, so this is so
Yeah.
Omniverse is the services that run on top of USD.
Yes,
We care about USD, not Omniverse.
they are importing IFC.
Well, they already imported, but it's
Yeah.
a dumb tree structure conversion. They've asked the question, can we USD as a proper transport of a client IFC? Asked if they want to do it, we'll help. Thank you.
All right. Again, with thanks to Autodesk for having a wonderful lunch now. I think we're reconvening at 1:30.